the night Daniel came home smelling like someone else's perfume. Sloane had already made up her mind. Not that night specifically. She had made up her mind 3 weeks earlier, sitting in the parking lot of the Loblaws on Dundas Street, nursing a cold Tim Hortons coffee and reading a text message that was not meant for her. Daniel's phone had buzzed on the passenger seat while he was inside grabbing milk. He had handed it to her absent-mindedly and asked her to check if it was his mother. It was not his mother. It was someone named Kira who had written, "Last night was everything. When can I see you again?" Sloane had read it twice. Then she had set the phone face down on the seat, finished her coffee, and stared at a crow picking at something on the asphalt until Daniel came back with a bag in each hand and a big, easy smile on his face. She had said nothing. She had smiled back. And right there, in that Loblaws parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon in October, something in Sloane Mercer quietly closed like a door. People always imagine that when a woman discovers her husband is cheating, she falls apart. They picture screaming, throwing things, mascara running down her face in the kitchen at midnight. What nobody pictures is this: a woman in a Toyota Corolla, completely still, already calculating. Sloane was 31 years old. She had a degree in accounting from the University of Guelph, a job she had kept through 2 recessions, and a mother who had once told her, at 12 years old, over a bowl of Campbell's tomato soup, that the most dangerous thing a woman can do is let a man know exactly how much she knows. Her mother had lived by that. Sloane had not fully understood it until that parking lot. She and Daniel had been married for 4 years. They lived in a detached house in Oakville, Ontario, a house that sat in both their names on the deed, but had been purchased primarily with money from Sloane's inheritance after her father passed. Daniel was a project manager at a construction firm, charming, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who remembered everyone's name at a party and forgot his wife's dry cleaning for the 4th week in a row. He was not a bad man, exactly. He was a careless one. And careless men, Sloane had come to understand, could do just as much damage as bad ones. She did not confront him that night. She served him dinner. She laughed at something he said about a colleague. She loaded the dishwasher while he watched the Leafs game in the living room, and when she got into bed beside him she lay perfectly still in the dark and began very quietly to build her plan. It took her 4 months. She started with a lawyer, a woman named Patricia who worked out of a small office on Lakeshore Boulevard and who had seen, she said with very little emotion, every version of this story. Sloane told her everything: the text message, the perfume, the way Daniel had started working late every Thursday, which happened to be the same night. Sloane had once spotted an unfamiliar Subaru parked outside their house for 3 hours. Patricia listened, took notes, and then explained Sloane's options in calm, plain language, including something that Sloane had not considered. That under the right circumstances, and with the right documentation, she had a strong case for the matrimonial home. "He'll fight it," Patricia said. "I know," Sloane said. "He won't see it coming." She hired a private investigator, a quiet man named Renner who wore a Tilly hat and drove a silver Civic and did not make it weird. He delivered photographs within 2 weeks, a downtown restaurant, a hotel near Square One. Kira, it turned out, was 24 years old and worked in Daniel's office, which meant it had been happening right under the noses of people who saw Daniel every day, and had also been to their wedding. Sloane put the photographs in a folder. She put the folder in a safety deposit box at a TD branch that Daniel did not know about. She opened her own bank account, not joint, not connected to anything with his name on it. She began redirecting a portion of her direct deposit, quietly, reasonably, the way you would move boxes from one storage unit to another without making a sound. She also called her sister, Faye, who lived in Kingston and had always disliked Daniel with a politeness so precise it could have been framed on a wall. "I need somewhere for me and the dog to go," Sloane said. "Maybe next month. Maybe sooner." Faye had asked exactly one question: "How much time do you need to get ready?" And Sloane had said, "I'm already ready, I just need the right weekend." Daniel gave her the right weekend in February. He announced on a Thursday morning, cheerfully, over toast and the CBC radio news, that he was going to a conference in Ottawa, Friday to Sunday. He even showed her the email confirmation, which Sloane looked at and recognized as having been forwarded to his own account from Kira's email address, the hotel booking made in both their names. She had seen Renner's photographs of that hotel. She knew exactly what the breakfast buffet looked like. "Have a good time," she said, and refilled his coffee. He left Friday morning with a rolling suitcase and a kiss on the cheek. Sloane stood at the front window and watched him back out of the driveway. She waited until his car had turned the corner at the end of the street. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and called Faye. "This weekend," she said. "I'm already in the car," Faye said. What happened over the next 48 hours was, by any measure, one of the most organized operations Sloane had ever executed, and she had once coordinated a year-end audit for a company with offices in 4 provinces. Faye arrived by noon. She brought their cousin Lena, who was a registered mover and happened to own a van. The 3 of them worked with the focused efficiency of women who understood that they were not just moving boxes, they were moving a life. They took the furniture that had been Sloane's before the marriage, the dining room set her parents had given them as a wedding gift that her mother had quietly reminded her was, technically, a gift to Sloane specifically. The reading chair from her apartment. The bookshelves she'd bought herself at 24, her grandmother's side table, the good pots. Both sets of bedsheets because Daniel had not bought bedsheets once in 4 years of marriage. They left him the couch, because it had been his before. They left him the television. They left him the coffee maker, though Faye suggested otherwise. They left him a neat, half-empty house that still smelled like the candles Sloane burned on Sunday mornings, because she had taken those twos. The hardest part was Biscuit. Biscuit was a 7-year-old beagle mix, who had technically been adopted by both of them, but who slept on Sloane's feet every night, and followed her from room to room, and once, memorably, had growled at Daniel when he raised his voice during an argument. Sloane put Biscuit's bed, his food, his leash, and his favorite rope toy in the van first. Biscuit seemed to understand that something important was happening. He sat on the front seat of Faye's car with a dignity that felt intentional. By Saturday evening, the house was arranged. Half of it, quietly and undeniably, was gone. Sloane had already spoken to a realtor named Conrad, who had come by 3 weeks earlier for what Daniel thought was an insurance appraisal. Conrad had given her a number that made her breath catch slightly, in a good way. The listing had gone up the previous Monday, while Daniel was at work, on a private network that reached pre-qualified buyers only. By Friday morning, before Daniel had even landed in Ottawa, there was an offer. She signed it Saturday afternoon at Faye's kitchen table in Kingston, with Biscuit asleep on her feet. She did not tell Daniel. He called Saturday night from what sounded like a loud restaurant and asked how she was doing. She said fine. She asked how the conference was. He said busy, lots of sessions. She said that sounded exhausting. She told him she missed him. He said he missed her too. He sounded slightly distracted, and she could hear a woman laughing in the background, and she felt, in that moment, absolutely nothing, which told her more than anything else could have, about how far she had already come. Daniel came home Sunday evening. He pulled into the driveway and sat in his car for a long moment before getting out, because he could see through the front window that something was different. The reading chair was gone from the front room. The curtains were different, or rather, absent. He could see straight through to the back wall. He tried his key in the front door. The key worked. That at least was familiar. What he walked into was a house that was quieter than a house should be. Not empty, there was still a couch, a television, the coffee table he'd bought at IKEA their first year together. But the warmth was gone. The bookshelves were bare white rectangles on the wall. The kitchen had gaps where appliances used to be. Her coat hooks by the door, the ones she'd installed herself with a level and a drill on a Sunday in March 2 years ago, held nothing. The hooks were still there. That was somehow worse. He called her name. His voice came back at him differently than it should have. He found the letter on the kitchen counter, under a mug she'd left there deliberately, because it had been a Father's Day gift from his daughter from a previous relationship, and she had not wanted to take it, whatever else she was taking. The letter was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph said that she knew, not some of it, all of it. It named Kira by full name. It mentioned Ottawa. It mentioned the hotel near Square One. It mentioned 4 other evenings from Renner's report that Sloane had not previously brought up. Evenings Daniel likely believed had gone unnoticed. She had noticed. The second paragraph said that she had spoken to a lawyer, that the house was under offer, and that he would be hearing from Patricia's office by Thursday. It said she wished him well. It was not sarcastic. She had written it carefully and she meant it, in the way you can mean something and also be completely done with it at the same time. At the bottom she had written, "Biscuit is with me. He's doing great." Daniel stood in the kitchen for a long time. He called her. It went to voicemail. He called twice more. Voicemail. He sent a text. Long, tangled, the grammar of a person whose understanding of events had not caught up to the events themselves. She read it and set her phone face down on Faye's coffee table, and Biscuit climbed up beside her and put his head in her lap, and her sister brought them both tea. What happened next Daniel likely did not anticipate, because he was a man who had spent 4 years underestimating Sloane in small daily ways that had added up to something enormous. He called Kira. He needed somewhere to stay, he said. He'd explain everything. He just needed a night, maybe 2, while he figured things out. There was a pause on the line. Kira said she thought they had been clear with each other. She said she liked him, she did, but she wasn't. This wasn't what she had signed up for. She had a roommate. She had a life. She had never agreed to be the person someone called when their marriage fell apart. She was 24 years old. She said she hoped he figured it out. She sounded like she was already composing the text to her friend about this conversation. The call lasted 6 minutes. Daniel sat on the IKEA coffee table in the hollow living room of the house that was no longer going to be his and looked at his phone and understood, in the way understanding sometimes arrives, all at once, like weather, exactly what he had done. He called Sloane again. She did not pick up. He left a message this time. It was the kind of message that comes from a place of genuine shock rather than genuine remorse, which is a different thing, and Sloane, who listened to it 2 days later, in Patricia's office, because Patricia had asked her to save anything he sent for the file, understood the difference. He was not sorry for what he had done. He was sorry that the consequences had arrived. That was the thing about Daniel. He had never really believed consequences were coming for him. Men like him rarely did. The offer on the house went unconditional the following Wednesday. The buyers were a young couple from Mississauga. She was a nurse, he was a teacher, who had been looking for 8 months and who cried a little at the showing, which was the kind of detail that Sloane found quietly comforting when Conrad relayed it to her. She was glad the house was going to people who would feel things in it. Daniel contested the sale through his own lawyer, a fact that added roughly 2 months and a notable amount of legal fees to the proceedings. Patricia was unsurprised. They always try, she said. Given the documentation Sloane had, the photographs, the inheritance records, the financial history, his position was not strong. He knew it. His lawyer probably told him. He eventually withdrew the contest and agreed to the settlement terms, which were reasonable, fair, and quietly devastating, in the way that fair things can be when you are on the losing side of them. The settlement gave Sloane the majority of the proceeds from the house sale, consistent with her original contribution to the purchase. It gave Daniel his pension contributions and his truck and the IKEA coffee table, which he was welcome to. It gave Sloane Biscuit, officially, in writing, in a clause that Patricia had included without being asked, because she had seen this particular issue become contested before, and was not going to let it happen here. The day the papers were signed, Sloane was sitting in a coffee shop on Princess Street in Kingston, a small place with good light and plants on the windowsill, and a barista who had learned her order by her 3rd visit. She was working. She had been consulting remotely for a firm in Toronto since November, and the work was steady and her own, and nobody could pull her into a meeting room and make decisions about her time without asking first. Her phone buzzed. It was Patricia, all signed. Congratulations, Sloane. She ordered a second coffee. She looked out the window at the snow starting to come down on Princess Street and thought about her father, who had bought that house in Oakville with money he had worked 40 years to save and who had left it to her specifically, in a will that used her name, not her husband's. He had known something, she thought, or maybe he had just loved her enough to try to protect her from something he couldn't name. She thought about Daniel in the IKEA coffee table living room. She did not think about him unkindly. She thought about him the way you think about a road you've driven so many times you could navigate it, with your eyes closed. Something familiar that is no longer part of your route. She thought about Kira, 24 years old, already moving on to the next thing in her life, as 24-year-old people do. She did not think about Kira unkindly either. Kira had not made Sloane a promise, Daniel had. Faye came in from the cold with 2 bags of groceries and snow in her hair and sat down across from her and said, "Is it done?" Sloane said, "It's done." Faye ordered a coffee and held up the cup and said to Patricia. "To Patricia," Sloane said. Outside, the snow came down steadily on Princess Street, and somewhere across town in a rental apartment Daniel was figuring out how to set up a new bank account and what it felt like to start over from a place that had not been his choice. That was not her problem to solve. It had not been for quite some time. Biscuit was asleep under the coffee shop table with his head on her boot, as he always was now, as if he had been doing it his entire life and not just since February. She finished her coffee. She opened her laptop. She had work to do.